late this evening. Really appreciate it. Please make sure you get food and beverage if you haven't already, and help yourself during the meeting if you need to refresh. My name's Einor Sawyer. I'm an orthopedist here at UCSF on the ortho faculty, run the skeletal health service. I also run the UC Space Health program. If that interests you, out of this world science and medicine, come talk to me. And I have a role in Innovation Ventures directing the Innovator Enrichment Program. I'm very happy to be co-hosting this event tonight with my colleague, Nate Prorock, who's heading up the Innovator Seminar Series. And we've got a really exciting discussion and panelists tonight on a difficult, complex subject, which they're going to help provide a primer for us and answer some of your toughest questions, and that's the field of regulatory around health innovation. That's David Pudwell and Geeta Rao, and they'll get a more formal introduction a little bit later. I first wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you to the seminar series and Innovation Ventures a little bit, and the Innovator Enrichment Program. And we're really here to help support frontline innovators at UCSF and help you move your ideas to impact and help you develop your careers as innovators, whether it's clinician innovator, a scientist innovator, or even an educator innovator. We want to help you become that intersection person that some of you have already expressed a desire for and some of you are exploring right now. So I'm going to move forward, and hopefully we're going to provide you some resources. But this seminar series is going to cover all these basic topics and hopefully provide you knowledge, but also some skills for that part of you that might want to be an innovator, for which you have no formal curriculum. You're well trained in your disciplines and your skills, but this is a piece where we're trying to build a curriculum for you. So this program is really a pilot for what will become the Innovator curriculum with the certificate program at UCSF. So that'll be something that'll help you with career advancement if you want to keep moving forward as an innovator. So let's just talk briefly. I'm going to skip this part, but I want you to know that from top down at UCSF, we have a lot of institutional level commitment to innovation here. And this is a quote from our AVCP, Catherine Lucy, and our provost, who heads up innovation at UCSF. And she says UCSF's top priorities include inspiring, identifying, and investing in frontline innovators who are translating novel ideas into beneficial impact at scale for healthcare and life sciences. And I think if you think about yourselves, whatever stage you're at, whether it's pre-innovator to serial innovator, hopefully that message rings true for you. And you know that the institution at the highest levels thinks that your work in this area is very important. That's also true for Innovation Ventures leadership. We have in the room with us tonight Dr. Peter Kotsanos, who's the Assistant Vice Chancellor at the Innovation Ventures Group, and he also heads up our large strategic alliances at the university with industry academic partnerships. And David Morris, I've put up here because some of you may not know him yet. He's the Vice Chancellor now of UCSF Innovation Ventures, but both of our leaders really are fully committed to developing and supporting frontline innovators. And first of all, inspiring you. So if you're in the pre-innovator stage and you're just exploring, you also belong here. And then also those of you who are somewhere along your career development as an innovator, we want to make sure that you know that we have resources for you. And at Innovation Ventures, we actually support the whole journey from idea to impact. The Innovator Enrichment Program also helps support you as an innovator, not just the things that you're building. This graphic talks about how you get all the way across from idea to impact. And these are the core units of Innovation Ventures, and they range in very specific functions that we serve, from the Office of Tech Transfer, or it used to be called Tech Transfer, but Technology Management and Advancement, Office of Strategic Alliances and Partnerships, Catalyst, an Invent Fund. And Catalyst, we have leadership in the room here from Dr. Charles Hart, and I mentioned Nate Prorock already, two of our advisors for Catalyst, people who have deep expertise in their fields outside of UCSF and do pro bono advising and helping develop your projects with you. Catalyst is our internal accelerator, and it's a phenomenal program, and applications open, and we'll keep you posted on those cycles from the website. And then the Innovator Enrichment Program is the program that we're based from with this seminar series. Again, I gave you a little briefing on that. I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute. And the entrepreneurship program, which you've probably seen some of these flyers for the Global Life Sciences Healthcare Entrepreneurship Program. And this is hosted once a year and led by Stephanie Maris. And their course is underway right now, but watch for this. Watch for the openings and the applications. It's usually run in the fall, but it's international. It's online. It's a real time commitment, but it's a real rewarding experience to go through. And this is for people who are very interested in becoming entrepreneurs or stepping out of their frontline innovator role into a company formation role and becoming an entrepreneur. We have people across the continuum as innovators. Some want to go out and help do company formation. Some go out and want to come back. We call them boomerangs. And so we're really happy to embrace and support you in any one of these capacities. So looking at the Catalyst Awards, I just want to go in a little bit deeper on this because this is something to think about. It's not just funding. It's actually this really important piece of getting multidisciplinary advising, mentorship, network building that really helps you advance quickly as an innovator, but also move your innovation along. And the final program presentations are going on right now in the last week and this week. And it's really exciting to see how the projects mature through this. So watch for those applications and that period. Usually they come through the RAP grant process. There's also a Catalyst Summer Internship Program. And this is a place where you can jump in and actually really become part of teams and learn to do market analysis, learn to function on the team of some project that's being developed at UCSF. And that gives you a really great way to get to know people, but also to build your skill sets. And again, Nate leads that and is a good contact person for that. So looking at innovator enrichment, we really want to expand the awareness that UCSF is an innovation leader amongst academic medical centers and healthcare delivery systems. We've got a pretty great reputation in that right now, but there's always room to build on that or also to make it more known. Sometimes we're a little bit understated. So part of this role you have as a frontline innovator is being an ambassador for that. We want to expand and diversify our innovator community and also our innovation targets. So when we talk about equitable innovation, it's about diversifying the innovator community, but also diversifying what we're innovating to solve, not just things that are highly commercially successful, but also things that have great impact at scale on people's lives, which is part of our mission at UCSF. We really want to embrace, support, improve the UCSF innovator experience, the environment and the ecosystem. And by ecosystem, I mean including people outside of the university. So the environment would be within UCSF, but we actually function best when we're partnering inside and outside of the university. That's where we create a lot of hybrid vigor or inflection points in our own innovations. And of course, that's how we help things scale. And finally, we want to do early identification. First, inspire, in case you're exploring, but if you're interested, we want to know about it. We want you to come to us and say, look, I'm really early stage, but I'm super interested in becoming an innovator and looking at my research as a starting point, as a discovery point in the beginning of innovating and scaling a potentially impactful and novel technology or solution. And then obviously we're going to keep monitoring all the work we're doing so that our program keeps morphing. But pay attention to the website, the UCSF Innovation website, and look for innovator enrichment, and you'll keep seeing new programs being announced. One that's coming up soon is a launch of the Innovator Consultations. This is where you can log in, make your own appointment on the calendar with one of our innovation experts, and have one-to-one time. And it doesn't matter what stage you're at. There aren't any silly questions. We want to help you at whatever stage you're at, move on to the next important resource or the next important person who can help you. So tonight, as a part of the UCSF Innovator Seminar Series, we're really privileged to be focusing on a tough topic called regulatory considerations. And I mentioned previously our two speakers, so I'm going to turn this over now and have Nate do the proper introductions.
Great. Thank you very much, Einar. This is a lot of fun today to be able to host this session focused on regulatory considerations. Oftentimes, when I work with principal investigators, whether it's through the Catalyst program or with the Catalyst Launchpad, which focuses on student and trainee entrepreneurship, there's tons and tons of questions on regulatory. And we're thrilled to have both David and Geeta here today to present and share their perspectives, their experience on regulatory. Both of them have a ton of experience. They are two of our most valued Catalyst advisors within the Catalyst program that Einar talked about a bit. And it's great for them to be able to share all they've known. Feel free to, just start generating some questions because you are all in for a great treat tonight. And so today I'm going to first introduce Geeta Rao. Geeta is the CEO of Springborn Life Sciences, and Springborn provides executive consulting services to startups and established companies on emerging medical technologies. So thank you very much. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, David Pudwell. David Pudwell will definitely be going first now. And David is ex-FDA. Whenever we have a question on what FDA is thinking about, how to think like FDA, David is right there. Whether it's digital health, medical device, combination products, David is fantastic with that. So without further ado, David, the floor is yours.
It's great. It's great to be with all of you here in person, and I know I think have a bigger crowd online than we even have here in the room. Or what's the? Oh,
Thank you, David. He just reminded me that was a very gentle prompt. Thank you for everyone who joined on Zoom. You might notice that we've turned the cameras and the audio off. We will be receiving all your messages through chat. We just had, for security reasons, we had to do that tonight. We had an unusual situation with someone coming in who had their own message to give that wasn't related to our meeting. So for security purposes, that's why you might see the camera and the audio is turned off. But we welcome you into the meeting. You can see and hear everything we're doing, and we'd love to have communication with you through chat. Thank you so much. Thanks for the reminder.
oh please. So anyway, so it's great to be here in the flesh, as it were. And I think we'll get right into FDA. So this is one of the posters that I had on my wall when I was working at FDA. And so it's helpful to get into the mindset of how FDA thinks about things like compromise, really, agreeing to respect each other's views, no matter how wrong yours may be. And that's generally, I think, the way you should think about how FDA sees the world. A senior leader who I was working on a project with, in one of the last years that I was at FDA, I was walking down the hall. He was on his way out. We just wrapped up some project, and we were in the middle of a big customer service initiative. Okay, and you can still actually give feedback in terms of FDA customer service now. There are links you can rate them, and we just kicked that program off. And he was joking with me that years ago the motto at FDA was that we're not happy until you're not happy. And so really you should keep this in mind when you're thinking about your interactions with FDA. Now, I joke a little bit, but in many cases it can be a little too real for a lot of the clients I work with, and a lot of what you guys may feel like you're dealing with. But with all that said, FDA really is a fairly interactive organization, and it's helpful to understand why they're slightly triggered by things, and to help you avoid some landmines as you work through the process and interact with them. Want to give you a little bit of a view of how they see the world and why they see it that way. So first and foremost, it's helpful to understand what FDA is tasked with doing. Okay, so FDA is supposed to ensure the safety and efficacy of various products, drugs, and medical devices, et cetera. And they're also responsible for advancing the public health. And we can talk a little bit later, about some of this as maybe a discussion topic as part of our conversation. But I really do believe that there is a real opportunity here in a lot of the regulatory changes that are happening to see more of an advancement in really helping to speed innovations. And if deregulation happens in the right kinds of ways, that can happen. If it happens in the wrong kinds of ways, we'll just see further entrenchment of existing large corporate interests and sort of incumbent advantage in the markets, which is what's happened with an advancement and sort of an entrenchment of bureaucracy over the last couple of decades, I would say. We've seen real advantages towards incumbents, towards basically large multinational corporations and sort of their, hold on the market versus, innovative, disruptive technologies really being given an edge and sort of a help along the way in advancing the public health. But so when you think about FDA and how they see the world, this picture, I love it. This just represents to me everything that FDA sees in the world. They see an array of hazards in front of a helpless public. Okay, this does get you into the right mindset for how FDA is first and foremost going to think about anything you put in front of them. So be careful about how you present things and try to avoid presenting anything that FDA is going to see as hazardous and problematic in the hands of untrained, naive, innocent users. Okay, so FDA really does take it, as their responsibility to protect the public from you and all of the dangerous things that you're going to put in their hands. So that is really how FDA sees themselves and their role. And the reason for that is that was the landscape before FDA really got involved. So, here we see. I don't know if you can see that, the image here very well, but, things like arsenic and interestingly, glucose, was listed as as far as I can tell, a toxic substance in this, so we've really come a long ways, and maybe we're back to where we started in thinking about toxins in food. And a lot of what actually, I've had this slide for a number of years in terms of various toxic substances that are in the food supply that we are ingesting and that we should probably get rid of. So that was sort of the initial remit of FDA. And, here we see a number of, other things that FDA was looking at, various, dangerous substances. Here we see, the kinds of things that were on the market, the kind of snake oil that would actually harm people. This person applied a hair removal a substance, but not to her head, and she lost all of her hair. So these are the kinds of things that FDA was seeing and was concerned about, and even some things that aren't really drugs or food or medical devices, but firecracker balls. FDA got involved in this because kids were grabbing these thinking they were candy and chewing them, and there were a number of injuries. So even with some things that you wouldn't think of as being, sort of food or drug or medical device related, FDA's gotten involved in some of these kinds of areas. That really wraps up what I want to get through, before I turn things over to Geeta. But want to also just let you know there's some resources here in terms of timeline and some details about major submission types. So a little bit of an overview about FDA classification for medical devices, which is risk-based, sort of low, medium, and high risk. That results in oftentimes products that are just registered and listed, products that have to go through a 510K, or products that have to go through a PMA review. And then some sense about how long that actually takes. There's some data on the FDA. There's some data that FDA has, available in terms of their MDUFA reports to Congress. And there's a great website here, fdadays.com, that I recommend you use for 510Ks and de novos when you're thinking about tracking how long something is going to take for the actual regulatory review. And then here's the Emergo experience. You can see sort of a rough sense of how long things take. And then there's a drug or NDA and biologic BLA review process diagram that FDA put out. This is an infographic you can get direct from FDA, and this is really helpful in understanding that process from sort of initial ideation through clinical studies and then onto the market and then into the post-market for drugs and biologics. And understanding how long it takes. This is what FDA will tell you, is that it takes, let's say right now, between 8 and 10 months on average. But what you'll find is that it takes quite a bit longer than that in terms of real-world data. So with all that said, I want to turn things over and invite the next speaker up.
Thanks, David. And David, in addition to being the principal consultant at Mr. Regulatory, he also teaches a course at UC San Diego. So I already gave my intro for Geetha, but I'm more than happy to give it again because Geetha is one of our esteemed Catalyst advisors. Similar to David, whenever there's a medical device, digital health, diagnostic, and they're wondering what's next, whether it's a 510K or how it's approved, how it's going through, Geetha is one of our very, very top people we speak with. So Geetha is the CEO of Springborn Life Sciences, and we're very excited to have you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, David. Well, that was a really great intro to the history of the FDA. I will recommend everybody, I think it's on YouTube, there's a wonderful documentary made by a friend of mine, Greg Myers, on the 100th anniversary of the FDA, which was almost 25 years ago now. So we're looking at a very old agency. So it's worth looking at it because it really helps you understand the agency's point of view. But let me switch gears a little bit. So let me recap a couple of things that David sort of sped through. So all of you, we set a baseline, and then I'll get into what I was going to talk about, which is how to strategize as an early stage entrepreneur. Okay. So the key thing that the FDA regulates, as David pointed out, is the safety and the effectiveness of a product. And in a nutshell, that means what does your product does what you say it does, and your product, in the process of doing that, it does not do what you don't want it to do. Okay, it's as simple as that. Does it do what you claim it does? And in the process of doing that, does it present acceptable risk? Okay, so pretty much everything that you do on a regulatory strategy or regulatory analysis is set to answer those two questions. Okay, so how do you do that? You would start by testing your product. You would start by maybe do some bench testing, do some animal testing, some simulations, and eventually you would have to go to, most of the time, you would have to go to a clinical trial or test humans or test whatever your target is meant to be. So that's the first part of it. Then you also have to do a pretty extensive amount of risk management, which has to do with understanding and analyzing where your product can fail and present risk. And so there are no free lunches. Whenever you try to intervene with the human body, you're going to cause risk of some sort. And FDA is very explicit. It does not expect zero risk. It expects you to demonstrate adequate benefit-risk ratio. So that's a very key concept. So I'll tell you a very short story. A couple of years, it was pre-pandemic, so it's more than a few years. We were in a pre-submission meeting, which is a meeting you can have with the FDA before you submit your product. And this was for a therapeutic device for a pretty significant health condition. And the physician founder was in the room with me. And back in those days, you would meet with them in person. So we were in this room with about 10 reviewers, and it was great because you could see them interacting with each other and discussing the technology and discussing the product and so on. And the indication we had asked for, which is what does the product get indicated for? Like, what can you use it for? And by almost sometimes explicitly the contraindication, what can you not use it for, is what's collectively called the indications for use. The indication was at a somewhat lower level in the progression of the disease. So imagine a disease that goes, a health condition that goes stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. This product we were asking about having approval for stage 1 and stage 2. And someone from the review team said, well, what about stage 3? And the physician said, well, that's a very difficult problem. And I remember so clearly the reviewer said, yes, but that's why if you solve it, we can accept greater risk with your product. And it was like a aha moment for me that, benefit risk is really a compelling argument if you're tackling difficult problems. So I don't want to discourage you from tackling difficult problems. I would like you to think in terms of, stretch a little more. And I'll talk about stretching in a little bit. So there are difficult problems to be solved. There are relatively difficult solutions or difficult to develop solutions that solve them. There are no easy answers. But if you can show that you can achieve a benefit and that benefit is commensurate with or adequate or acceptable for the risk you offer, then you are in a better place to make the argument for the FDA. Okay. And then the more logically you can lay that out, the better off you'll be. So if you start thinking in those two terms, what does my product do and what should it not do? Or what's my tolerance? That's the word I often use. What is my tolerance for things I don't want it to do? Then those are the two things, the lenses through which you want to look at your product. And that kind of risk-based review reflects in the entire framework of the regulatory structure at the FDA. So David sped through a couple of things about class 1, class 2, and class 3. Those are just 3 different risk levels. And based on the level of risk, you have different regulatory bars. You have to do more things or provide more evidence or do more studies. So kind of giving you a really quick foundation there. Okay, so now with that said, I'm going to do some fun stuff, which is talk about what are some things you can do. So I'm calling this 3 steps to manage your regulatory risk for your innovation, okay? So let's roll with this. I've never done this talk before, so I had some fun with putting it together, except I don't know how to move a slide forward with this touch screen. Oh, that one, great, thank you. Okay, so the compliance journey is not straightforward. Nothing ever moves the way you think it does. Well, nor is the innovation journey, I would say that. So, there are twists and turns, and even in the lowlands part, before you get to the more difficult higher altitudes, you're still going to have to do some twisting and turning and working around. So keep in mind a few things before we talk about strategy. The FDA is a necessary buyer, and I use that word in quotes because there's a sales literature that talks about the buyer profiles. Okay, you have 2 customers. You have the regulator and your clinical customer, and potentially the patient or whoever. So it is a very specific buyer. You do need to sell them. So treat them as one, and do your customer discovery. Okay, do your buyer discovery. I noticed in the curriculum that you put up that stakeholder discovery was very early, but regulatory was like number 10. And stakeholder discovery was 4th in the line. I know it wasn't in order, but so the idea is start thinking about the FDA as a key stakeholder and a key customer because they have to, quote, buy your product. And typically, it's the role of the FDA can be seen as a gatekeeper or a blocker. But in reality, they can also be a champion or an influencer. You get the FDA stamp of approval, that's really helpful. The FDA itself has grants sometimes to help develop products. There are lots of ways in which, with the right in the right place, the FDA itself may be a resource for you. So don't forget about that. Okay, and as with any stakeholder, whether it's your investor, your customer, your collaborator, you will need a strategy to de-risk the novel elements of your innovation, okay? So even for the FDA, you need to de-risk your novel elements. There's no question about that, okay? So strategize early and be ready for changes because other regulatory products get approved and set the bar for what you have to do. And it may be a higher bar, it could be a lower bar, you don't know, so keep looking out. And the regulatory standards can change. FDA just went through a massive down-regulation binge for in vitro diagnostics. David alluded to the fact that we can expect to see more deregulation in the coming years, in the next few years. So regulatory thresholds change, and sometimes they go up, like I think infusion pumps, pulse oximeters up, and in vitro diagnostics and some digital health clinical decision supports, down-regulated. So watch it, okay? Don't make an assumption that what you've learned in a given moment or a given day is going to hold over the course of your innovation development. And finally, here's a key thought to take away. If you are truly novel, if you're truly bringing something new and innovating, it is unlikely that a perfectly aligned regulatory framework is already in place. The FDA cannot imagine or predict you're going to invent something and have a regulatory framework in place. So think about that and say, I'm inventing something new. Don't go to a consultant and say, what will the FDA, do with this? How do I get this through the FDA? Think for yourself and say, what are the first principles, safety and effectiveness principles, by which I have to assure this technology? Okay, so it is very unlikely, if you're doing something truly out there, that something already fits. So you've got to navigate this space. It's no different from trying to change a customer buying behavior or a clinical workflow, or wherever you're introducing disruption. Even the regulatory framework, you have to look at disruption there, and you have to think through it. Okay, all right. So with that in mind, let's talk about 3 steps you can take. Okay, so the first is what I will call stretch yourself concept. Okay, we'll get into each of these in detail. The second is then, so this is about looking inwards. Look at what you're doing and stretch that concept. The second is to scope out the landscape, the regulatory landscape around your self-concept. What is out there? What does it look like? And finally, come up with charting a product roadmap. Okay, so I'll try in the 10, 15 minutes I have to step through these things. And these are all early stage things, early in the innovation cycle. Okay, before you go to David and go to the FDA. Okay, so first let's stretch your self-concept. Okay, so basically find as many ways your innovation can serve as many stakeholders as you can think of. Okay, so just don't say, oh, I've got this device that can do X. Think more broadly. And the more broadly you think and the more conversations you have, the more different ways of using a device will come to you, or the device may be used will come to you. I see that all the time. We work with early stage companies exclusively, and they will come talk to us, and 6 months later, they've had a great conversation with somebody and they've completely pivoted. You're going from a screening tool to an ER triage tool. You're going from a biomarker of monitoring disease to becoming a drug discovery tool. There's just wild switches in terms of what your product is going to do. The innovation is the same, or the core mechanism is the same. So start with that. So think about all the possible medical uses of your innovation within existing workflows or new workflows and non-medical workflows, increasingly a focus on moving upstream into preventative care, well-being, and patient empowerment. Okay, potential patient populations that could be indicated, contraindicated. Maybe there's a special needs population with humanitarian use applications. There's always regulatory bars that are lower for these special needs. So there's something called an orphan device, which is not as well protected as an orphan drug, but it's something like 5,000 or 8,000, I think is the current number. So if fewer than 8,000 people have a particular disease or health condition that you're trying to address, you get a very streamlined regulatory pathway. So look for these, special cases that you have. Look for potential use environments, expand it out of the clinical, the ER, the OR, medical office, the ambulance. Look in general environments, home, school, office, airports, and then special environments, mass casualty sites, outer space, for inner, and remote or wilderness areas. And many products start out in these special use cases because it gets them get into the market, gets users, and then you move it into more mainstream environments. So there are places out there that you can stretch into. And the likely stakeholders for clinical use, okay? Now, especially in digital health, there could be multiple stakeholders. There's the patient, there's the triage or the back office person who's administering the monitoring, then there's the clinician, and then there's sort of the general purpose physician or the general physician who's taking care of you. So there's a lot of different stakeholders, and these, especially products with software and cloud connectivity nowadays, this notion of the device boundary has evaporated more or less, has perforated, I should say. And lots of different people interact asynchronously with the technology. That lends itself to lots and lots of regulatory challenges because the frameworks weren't designed for that. So that's one of those puzzle pieces that don't fit very well. But think about it, and don't, of course, forget the financial stakeholders, the winners and losers with your innovation. And I don't mean just your investors. I mean, if you have digital pathology, are you going to disintermediate a very lucrative business in pathology, or you're going to, so there are considerations like that come into play. Okay, so, and finally, and very importantly, if a device provides information, let's say it's a measurement device or some kind of interpretation device, then the specific clinical outcomes or decisions that it will impact. We call this the so what question. You can do X, so what? Why is that important? And I know you've talked, the ICOR, you talk about value creation, but I mean, very specifically the clinical outcomes. Now, keep this in mind because you want to use all of this information. Step one, go stretch your self-concept, imagine your innovation in a range of environments. Just say, could it be used here? Could it be used there? Are there populations of special interest? Are there locations? Are there environments? All these sorts of questions, ask yourself and use them to create what I will call a ledger maybe, or a list of potential claims you can make about your device, okay? So what do you, or your innovation, what can your innovation affect or impact? So that's, and be as broad as you can possibly be in that exercise. And we'll come back to the claims in a moment, in a later step. Okay, so that's step one. Examine yourself, stretch your identity, stretch your self-concept, okay? So let's go to step two. Now you have a pretty good idea of all the different spaces you might have an impact on. What is happening in those spaces from a regulatory standpoint? So find the clinical areas where the risk-benefit trade-off, and I gave you a little primer on it, feel feasible and where they are optimal. So sometimes it's possible, but may not be easy, but there may be sweet spots out there. So look for those sweet spots, a disease that's really intractable, or a patient population that has a particular challenge, or look for these pockets of optimal, places where you can really make a difference, or where you can start. Okay, that's the key thing I want to say. There's no one place for your device to be. It could be in more than one place. Okay, so determine the potential intended use. I put that in quote. That's a term of art in the regulatory world, the FDA. It means very specifically how and why your device is going to be used. I say device, but think more in terms of your innovation or your functionality in the various clinical areas. And then identify the products of interest with similar intended use. So look for other products in the market. Their websites, and David has a pretty good list there, I think. Their website, you could go to the FDA website directly, and you can find products. That's a whole workshop in itself, how to search the FDA website. It suffers from having too much information, actually. So, you can search and you can find what it is that other products are doing, and you can get a remarkable amount of information about these other products. You can go online, you can see what product was approved, and you can look at what's called a 510K summary, or the summary of what the tests they did, what they claimed. There's a lot of useful information. So you can get a sense for what product that's similar in its intended use, and that could be potentially what's called a predicate device. That's a particular pathway to get your approval, which is unfortunately, I don't have a slide on that in this deck, but you can compare your product to another product. The FDA is the only regulatory authority in the world that allows this, and I understand they're rethinking it, but they haven't been able to get rid of it. I don't think they can. I mean, just there's too much entrenched legacy in it. So, but the idea is, if you can show that you're somewhat similar to another product, you can get a regulatory approval on the coattails of this other product. That's called a predicate product. Or identify products with either a similar technology or a similar risk profile. And they are possible what I will call reference products, okay? And they will help you determine the expected regulatory validation. So a great resource to look for is clinicaltrials.gov. So if you know a product that you think you might have, that might be in a similar profile on some front, maybe a completely different indication, but in some ways similar, go on clinicaltrials.gov, look at the testing they've done. You'll have a pretty good idea of how many patients, how long the test took, phase 1, phase 2, whatever they did. You get a lot of great information on the public databases. That'll help you understand assess what the bar will be for the particular kinds of claims you want to make, okay? So that's step two, part of it. And then finally, for each of these products, assess the regulatory burden in each of these clinical areas. So look at clinicaltrials.gov, look at the FDA summaries of different approved products, and you will have a pretty good sense for, in the spaces you think you can play, what else is there and what is the bar? What does that look like? What does the terrain look like? Is it steep climb? Is it a easy flat walk? What is it? Look, you can figure that out. Okay, so the key thing to keep in mind is that the degree of regulatory oversight and depends on the risk presented by the device while taking into consideration the benefits, okay? So, and David showed you the class 1, class 2, class 3. That's kind of a rough classification of the risk levels. And the degree of regulation can vary based on that. So here's a kind of a rough landscape, okay? Increasing regulatory burden, increasing clinical impact. So the bottom left, you have, health and just general wellness and well-being support products. And that's sometimes called enforcement discretion, which the FDA basically is loosely interpreted to mean you're not regulated. I like to describe it as kind of the driver's license law. You're supposed to have a driver's license, but if you get out in the parking lot or your teenage son or sibling gets out and does it, chances of getting caught are not so great. But if you do, it's a problem. So, but you can go to market. They're legitimate enforcement discretion areas. The FDA has a guidance on it, so you can use that. What products meet that condition? Then the next one is sometimes a product that's sometimes a class 1 product, maybe used for surveilling, screening, or a minor, like a widget to help, let's say, insert a catheter or a surgical tool of some sort. Those are sometimes called 510(k) exempt, which is a way of saying, okay, you can go to market as long as you meet your quality systems, but you don't have to get pre-market approval from the FDA, okay? And then you escalate. You can go to monitor for specific metrics, a specific health condition. You're not just surveilling or screening. Then you can be going to diagnosis if you're in the diagnostics direction. Otherwise, you could be informing a therapy decision or eventually providing therapy. So, and this is just a representative set of uses or use cases that I've laid out. You could be a drug discovery tool. You could be a biomarker. There are lots of different ways that you can, the key thing you notice in the way I have phrased this, they all start with a verb. So start with a verb. What does your product do? Okay. So don't say it is a biomarker. It provides something. So start with a verb and lay it out in this landscape, increasing regulatory burden, increasing clinical impact. Okay? All right. So that was step 2. Okay, big steps, but useful to keep going. Okay, now it's stuck.
All right. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. I guess my question would be, I'm Woody Fogas, med student. What role do you think the commodification of knowledge, like with artificial intelligence and with the oncoming of artificial superintelligence and the implications of that for authorship from an intellectual property standpoint, what role does all that play into what we've been discussing in terms of like scoping the regulatory landscape, gauging how novel or innovation is? There are a lot of many different directions we could take that discussion, but that for me, that's been like the elephant in the room because.
Certainly. I can say a few words, but David, feel free to please add your perspective. So in general, FDA has the pace at which the regulatory frameworks evolve is considerably slower than the pace at which technology evolves. My observation is that the gap is widening and that, FDA only started understanding how software is built pretty late, like 2011 or something. We saw first reasonable framework, and then it's very, very slowly started to recognize that software doesn't work like hardware. Software development doesn't work like hardware development. I would say it's been less than 10 years now, even less than that, when the agency started to, and I will say, FDA is no different from anywhere else in the world. All the regulatory authorities are in that sense. They are some other Europe maybe a little bit further along with their regulatory frameworks, but even trying to get some kind of guidance or some kind of approach to these things has been challenging. Now, what that means is, and again, I'll refer to David's deck on that, is that FDA reverts to its comfort zone, which is to say no. It just says no. And to date, very, very few AI products. Now, on paper, there's over 500 and something AI devices approved, but most of them are not truly AI in that sense. They're basically, the vast majority, like 90+% of them are in image processing. So they're really looking at images and identifying regions of interest that a physician can then interpret, or calling the physician's attention to it. But the AI itself, so-called AI itself, isn't doing very much. Now, there's a lot of AI being used in the hospitals. They're off-label. They're not approved by the FDA, but that's not the same thing. So I think we are looking at an era maybe where that'll get a bit better in terms, at least that aspect, where the agency will be more open to novel new technologies and willing to maybe take a chance on it. But, David, go ahead and
Yeah, I
speak to
guess
this.
we'll jump back into your presentation in a second, but I would say for AI, absolutely, FDA is still thinking about AI regulation in terms of locked algorithms.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have more access to, rudimentary AI technology on your phone and, with a Chat GPT, subscription. So, FDA has a long ways to catch up in terms of real, iterative kinds of machine learning and AI, technology. They're very, very far behind, and innovators always lag. I should say, FDA always lags the innovators, but they're very, very far behind. Regulation is always behind, but in this case, I would say
It's extra behind and getting further behind by the
Yeah.
day. So not good news there. Maybe, yeah, not where things stand right now, but may change. So that's just the way. Okay, so step one, stretch your self-concept. Step two, understand, scope out your regulatory landscapes. Now put the two together. What do you have to do? You chart a product roadmap, okay? And this is not a fixed in stone roadmap. It's a roadmap that you can sort of surf with and move as the waves come, okay? So it's pretty straightforward. Establish a series of product profiles with diversified, or let's say regulated product profiles with increasing or diversified clinical impacts. So maybe it's a cardiology product that can measure heart rhythms. And now, the next level is it's going to give you an ECG-like trace, or the next level would be it's recognizing, atrial fibrillation. The next level might be, or maybe it's predicting heart failure. So you can look at that, or you could look at the same technology, maybe using a different signal type. Maybe you're looking at EEGs instead of ECGs if your technology is more around signal processing. So the idea is try to come up with actual products that your innovation might, or that might be, that in which your innovation would be encapsulated. So from step one, remember I told you to think about the list of claims you can make. Okay, so put together a checklist. Even for the simplest of technologies, you can easily come up with 25 or 30 of these, maybe 100 of these. Say, for stakeholder X, this innovation can enable benefit Y. Okay, just think broadly across the board. There's a lot of different options. So put your list of claims down. Then from step two, assess the technical and likely clinical validation, because you're looking at comparative products, you're looking at other things that will be required for each claim. So say, okay, this would be really difficult because this other company had to do a clinical trial with, 10,000 patients, or this will be easy. Look, they got an approval based on, 30-patient trial, or whatever it is. You can start to say, okay, what is the likely bar that you're looking at? And then start by first, always, whether you go to market with it or not, identify the minimum viable regulated product. Okay, start with that. Say, what is your minimum viable regulated product, which is the minimal claims of impact? It could just be measurement, could just be a display of something. Okay, and the lowest regulatory burden. Just start at the bottom left, as far down as you can go. Okay, and then add claims to it, add subsequent claims, and develop product profiles that you add. So this is going to give you a what I call a claim escalation strategy. Now, not all stopping points along this escalation strategy are actually products that go to market. Sometimes they're products that are just for research use only, that you can use in a clinical trial maybe, or sometimes they're just products for understanding how the clinical workflow works, whether clinicians would use it and how it's sort of a usability trial. Sometimes it's a proof of concept. Sometimes it could even be something like a health economic assessment that says, how much time do we save in the clinician workflow by using this product? So there are lots of different uses of these what we call intermediate milestone type products, okay? And then determine your claim escalation strategy that goes with it. And for each of these, establish what we call the formal indications for use, which is, what is the product going to do? Who's going to use it? Who's going to, which patients can it be used for or contraindicated for? What environments it's going to be used in, and so on. So the basics of indications. You put that together, and that'll give you a series of product profiles. And then for each of these, and I would suggest a minimum of 3 product profiles, a very bare minimum, maybe some intermediate step, and a final like escalation, like your vision for the first like real go-to-market product, or 4 or 5. It doesn't have to be 10, that's too many. Just think about it ahead of time. And then for each of them, you look at that product over its life cycle and ask yourself, first, step 1, in the concept feasibility phase, where some of you are, what is your definition of your regulated product? What is the claims it's going to make? What is its indication for use? Then once you start getting into some more, firming up your design, you can do what's called a pre-submission or a breakthrough designation request. Okay, breakthrough device designation. You can request that. So there's a couple of different kinds of pre-submissions, but there's a bunch of different kinds. And then eventually, as you get into the validation phase, you want to build a device that's used for a version, that's used for investigational use or an NDA, or an IND, if it's a drug, it's an IND for drugs or biologics, and so on. And then finally, you submit for approval and wait till you get approval, okay? So this, throughout your product life cycle, now you can overlay this. So if you had 3 profiles, let's say product A, product B, product C, you can lay out your key regulatory milestones, and they can be interleaved with each other. So now what happens? You get an opportunity, you know very quickly where it fits in. You have a great conversation with a clinician partner that says, hey, I'm looking for a way to test this out, or I'm happy to help test it out, roll with it. Or if you get an opportunity to partner with a drug company that wants to look for as a surrogate endpoint for a trial they're doing, there are lots of things that come up, and you can pivot because you know immediately what the impact is going to be. Okay, so 3 steps, Now some final thoughts. First is plan for unexpected regulatory roadblocks. Sometimes the FDA just gets unreasonable. You can't convince them. And half the time it's a regulator that just doesn't want to take risk. And I'm sure David has a few choice stories about that. And sometimes they're happy to take a risk. It's actually, I've seen both extremes, so both range. And there are opportunities. COVID happened. Lots of diagnostic devices were given emergency use authorization. In fact, COVID, the emergency is still ongoing. Mpox is ongoing. So, if you have an infectious disease detection system, you could very easily have some really low bar regulatory pathways. Sometimes you could have, as I said, a partnership opportunity. So the regulatory options are not just roadblocks, the changes. They're not just, things don't just get worse, they can get better or easier too, so be tracking. Not all product profiles have to be placed on the market. I already talked about that. Okay, they are more for you to have a really clear understanding of the risks and benefits of your product. And at any time have at your fingertips, oh, we could do this, but that would mean X, or we couldn't do this because that would mean an unacceptable risk. So just really know that very well, okay? This is probably, if there's one takeaway, this is it from this entire talk. You only get to place on the market what you get approved for. Therefore, your regulatory strategy is your marketing strategy, okay? Your market strategy is what you get approved for. They are joined at the hip. They are one and the same. So do not lose that. Don't just say, oh, we did customer discovery. There's a real need for this. If there's not a regulatory pathway, it doesn't matter. Your key blocker, your key other buyer is not going to buy it, and you will not be able to sell this product, okay? So that is probably the single most important takeaway for today. And finally, this is something that I see a lot in early stage entrepreneurs and innovators, which is you have to reconcile messaging. You can't pick and choose the best of what you would like the world to be. So here's the messaging. To investors, you generally want to emphasize this is unique and patentable. Okay, and to customers or clinicians, you're saying this works better than what we have now. But then you can't go to the regulator and say, well, there's nothing new here. It's the same old FDA. You approved all these other products. Give us the same, 510K. Or we should be held to the same bar as other products, because, this is a fundamental conflict between the two stakeholders, the two customers you have, or the two buyers you have. And I see very many startup entrepreneurs not getting that. So go ahead, Charles.
Quick question on that last point. Does the FDA look
absolutely.
to the internet or to JP Morgan and see what companies?
Absolutely. I just had a case, it was a client we worked with about before COVID, and they ran into clinical recruitment problems for their trial. And so they just went to market with lower claims of, thinking they were going to be consumer health and wellness. Man, the FDA came right after them. It took us 4 months to talk them off the ledge and say, no, it's okay. Now, the one thing that happened, of course, that the FDA did not tell them to take the product off the market. They only said, change your website. And the whole negotiation ended up being how much change was okay. And we went through about 3 rounds before the FDA bought off on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I had a similar situation recently with a product that's clearly a general wellness product, but they're trying to get claims and develop clinical evidence.
Yeah.
And that's when sometimes you run into problems is the device today with no claims is fine. You can put it on the market as a general wellness device, but you want to develop the claims, evidence, and to the point here, you get what you're approved for, but you also get approved for what you studied. Usually.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Make sure that you study what you want to market.
Yeah, that's very.
So wouldn't it be smart for a new company to have their website balance that being attractive to investors, but being okay with the FDA?
I would generally advise, if it's feasible, make the product you're studying for clinical claims to be called something different, run by a different named company, and you segregate the two. It's not always possible, and I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, but I generally advise, if you've not already screwed that up, plan your strategy to have 2 separate companies, one that does the less regulated products, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I have an approach I suggest, and then I guess we're out of time, so and I can't tell you how many websites I edit all the time, and I have to say, but it just is a constant chore. You have to get on the entrepreneurs and say, okay, that's not going to be okay, or your marketing literature, even your recruitment literature, you can't make claims like this. So, and maybe David, if you don't like this, you shouldn't listen, but as the ex-FDA. So here's my trick around this. I say, when you're talking about aspirational stuff, like our product's going to solve XYZ health condition or, alleviate that, then when you're talking about that sort of, then you say, we are developing technology that aspires to, or that has the promise of, or that can do this. And we welcome collaborators. You can't sell, you can't market, you can't say it's ready on the market. You can have a separate line that's a page on your website that says products, currently on the market. And then that's where you are more specific with what you are allowed to market. So it's okay to have some aspiration, something that displays your core technology and invite collaborators or stakeholders or other interested people to talk to you. But just be really clear, this is not a product for sale. This is just aspirational. So I don't know if that'll fly with the FDA, but I've done this a few times and it's generally okay. Yeah.
I want to thank you very much, Geeta. I wanted you to have a chance to wrap up your portion. We
I'm
sort
done.
of merged into Q&A sort of accidentally, and we're going to do that. But did you want to close, or are you
No, I'm
good
done,
there?
pretty much. So I would just close by what I started with. It's like, stay on top of, lean into regulatory strategy early on. It is your market strategy.
Thank you very much. We're going to move now into Q&A, and I think it'd be good, Dave, if you just came over this way, and we'll just stand around and have an informal Q&A here. I have a couple of questions to lead off, but this is really meant to be interactive with the people in the room, and of course, everyone on Zoom. If you have questions, now is the time to put them in chat so we can capture your thoughts and your inquiries as well. And then we'll be closing out here probably in about 10 minutes. So let's start now. One of the questions you already just answered, but a lot of people in the room here might be early on in their innovation career. Let's see hands of people who feel like they're either pre-innovators or early stage innovators. Okay, great. So when do you think it's the right time to think about regulatory and to be asking, does this even pertain to my innovation? Does regulatory even pertain? When's the right time to ask that question?
Okay, so I would say day one, right? As soon as you start talking about your value proposition. Okay, I would say the right time to start asking is more or less day one. Even if you don't use the exact specific terms around regulation, you want to start thinking about what will my product do and what should it not do.
And we actually encourage that. So the minute you step to the whiteboard with your ideas and you start sketching out your idea, we say two things. That's the moment you start to say, what's going to be my evaluation plan? And that is when you ask also, is this going to need to fall under regulatory, or does it not fall under regulatory? Because that actually dictates your validation plan and your roadmap. So the minute you step to the whiteboard with your idea, we think is the right time to be asking about, does it pertain to regulatory or not regulatory? And that helps dictate your evaluation plan, because that's what you should be building. You made a point earlier when you talked about how the regulatory pathway is really pertinent to your market strategy and really dictates that. And we always say that evidence isn't just a good business model, it's the only successful business model, and that goes back to regulatory again. So you can see how, even though this may seem like a talk that you wouldn't have to worry about till much later, because we use the word product a lot, it's really about the innovation. So you need to think really early about these things. Do you have a question that you tell people to ask when they're trying to decide, do I even have to think about regulatory with this innovation?
Okay, so I actually like to reframe their thinking on that. And I would say to them, it's not about whether you're regulated or not. You are regulated no matter what. You're always regulated. It's the degree of regulation or the kind of regulation that you will be subject to. So that's the first reframing. The second reframing is, it's not a given. It's not like my product is X and static and the regulation is, going to be whatever it is. It's, you have a choice in your innovation to productize it in ways that navigate the regulatory landscape. So that picture I showed you of, the winding road you can take, you don't have to go straight uphill with, a harness and rock climbing gear. You can take a different, you can choose what you go to market with with consideration of the regulatory landscape. And you might have products along the way that allow you to take a little bit more de-risked approach where you're not going to just fall off the cliff, but you're going to take the winding road around, but you'll get there surely. And more, and if you can show that pathway to investors, they are much happier with that.
Sort of piggybacking on that, I mean, my general advice to most people is that you can do more with what you already have than you think you can. And you should, if it's possible, and for a lot of products it is, you should get it in front of consumers today, even if that's a clinical, trial under IRB. Like oftentimes, look, there's some products that absolutely you have to go to IRB, you have to go to FDA and get an IDE to actually study it clinically. But a whole lot of stuff you can put in front of people. You can start getting feedback about your innovation today. Don't wait. Don't, try to do the really hard thing first. Do the thing you can do today and get it in front of customers and get feedback. Like, do that. The faster you can get there, the faster people like us can actually give you useful feedback.
And to that point, is it hard or scary to talk to someone at the FDA? I'm looking at you because he looks kind of scary, doesn't he?
So I would say you should both relax a little bit more about talking with FDA, but also be super careful about your interactions with FDA. So it's both things. Like one, you can interact early with FDA and you can go in and not even ask any questions. Just tell FDA what you're doing. I would generally advise you to have somebody like us helping you with that. You can just put the package together and submit it yourself, but oftentimes I find myself cleaning up my clients' messes after they've told FDA a whole bunch of stuff that now has framed FDA's thinking about how this product is regulated, when I could have helped them navigate a much easier path if they hadn't gone and done that. But so you can get into FDA and start getting feedback. You can really start building that relationship. So there's something called an informational pre-submission if you're on the device side of things. There are interact submissions and early submissions you can do with CDER and with CBER as well. And so you should think about interacting much earlier than you think is necessary. But the plan is to then continue building on that and then developing that relationship and then having further conversations. And so you should really plan on, if you can't get pro bono support from people like us, and we do probably more of it than we should, then you should really think about getting that funding fairly early on. You will thank your future self will thank you for getting the funding that you need to get credible regulatory help. The other thing is, when you're picking who it is that you're going to get regulatory support from, talk to people who have gotten regulatory support before. Pick people to help you who are actually credible. Just because somebody's got a shingle out on the internet and says that they can help you with regulatory does not mean that they're competent in helping you specifically with the problem that you're dealing with, or that they're competent to help you at all. And so you generally want to rely on feedback that you're able to get from other people about who they've used, who they've had success with. Definitely do that, because I also, as an ex-FDAer, clean up a lot of messes from less than competent regulatory, help that people have sought early on because it happened to be cheap, and you'll pay for that eventually.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that and more. No disrespect, David, but sometimes just because somebody's been at the FDA isn't necessarily.
Oh, no, absolutely no. I second that. Don't pick an ex-FDAer either. It's a bad idea.
Because it's a bad idea for the following reason. I've seen it go wrong for the following reason. If they've only been with the FDA, unlike David, who has been on the other side too, then they've only been on what I call the buy side of things. They've only been buyers of your package. They've never been on the sell side. They have no idea what it's like to put together a product that can meet the regulatory bar, and have no empathy or no understanding. And oftentimes they will think they know how to help you out and they can be super conservative and expect you to do things that's not possible. So really, you have to choose, and you also just, like most consultants, it has to be somebody you feel appreciates the product you're working with, or can see the possibilities or help you out there strategically. Mm-hmm.
I guess it's like anything. If you're going to hire a contractor to help you with your house, and that person's going to do your electrical, you want to make sure that they've done that before, that they're not doing it for the first time on your house. Same with plumbing. Just because they can do electrical does not mean that they can do plumbing. Just because they can do plumbing does not mean that they can do electrical and, a whole lot of other kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. Not all regulatory consultants are made the same, and not all of us know all of the product areas. I have a pretty diverse background of products that I'm familiar with because of what I worked with at FDA, what I've worked with with various industry, stakeholders. But, most consultants, if they are good at something, it's probably relatively narrow. They've had success with that before. That's what you should use them for, not something else. Just because you've used them before for a product doesn't mean you should go back to them again for a new product. You should make sure you're working with somebody who's had success with that product area before.
Yeah, completely.
Thank you very much. We've got some questions in the audience, so we're going to turn to loop them into the conversation. I think the mic is ready for one.
Hi, thank you. Hi, thank you for your insights. I was wondering in terms of consulting meetings with regulatory affairs, what can we do as the inventor to maximize those meetings so we're presenting the right information and you're able to deliver the best consulting meeting?
Oh, that's a really good question. So generally, David, I guess it depends. I'll let you answer for yourself. But for us at our organization, we actually have a very relatively formal client information request that we have you fill out a questionnaire and tells you, it's a very detailed questionnaire. And then sometimes it can take a few weeks to get through all the information we want from you. So we walk you through what we need. But a lot of times it exposes things that you haven't thought about or haven't had, you don't have data yet. So we'll identify that. So very often that's what we will do. I don't come in expecting, on our side, we don't come in expecting you to know anything about regulatory. It's our job to walk you. So that's how we look at it. So that it's just a different model of consulting. Yeah, but David.
Yeah. No, it's similar. A lot of consultants will have that sort of set of questions and detailed information they're going to want from you. I work with founders at various different points along that whole journey. I tend to be a little bit more flexible in terms of what they give me, depending on what their needs are. But I will tell a lot of people after I probably put more time into it than I should on the front end before people are paying me money. So it's not a good business model that I run, but there's basic information you need from a client, but what I can do for somebody depends a lot on what it is that they can give me. And then the other piece is trying to figure out whether they actually need my help or not. And so oftentimes I'm figuring that out in a first meeting or a review of information, is oftentimes letting somebody know you don't need my help, or I should refer you to somebody else, et cetera. So a lot of what I do is sort of weed out who I can actually help. It's not like I take all comers who come to me and are looking for something.
Are there, I'm sorry.
Oh, the one quick thing I'll add then is, but in the spirit of your question, is it's the same thing I will tell someone when we are talking about a pre-submission meeting with the FDA. It's like, what is the question you have? And what evidence do you have that shows the background information to that question that enables the FDA to make a decision? So it's the same thing. If you come to me and say, what's my regulatory pathway? I'm going to ask, okay, have you looked at similar products? And it doesn't mean that you have, it's just those are questions I would have. Like, what does your product actually do? What are other similar products out there? What has been the FDA's history of regulating such products?
And one thing, I'll oftentimes send people on to a business development person that I work closely with. So, your first contact maybe shouldn't be regulatory. Sometimes you should figure out what's actually going to allow you to market a product. And then I can help you figure out how to do that. Because oftentimes if you just come to me and ask me how to get a product on the market, I can tell you 5 ways to get that product on the market. But I don't know if any of those are going to allow you to commercialize that idea or to get reimbursement for it. And a lot of products get onto the market and then die because of reimbursement or, sort of, commercialization issues. And so I tend to push a lot of my clients towards figuring that out. Like, what do you want? Because I don't want to just get you on the market. I can do that. And sometimes that it does make sense to do for some, companies. But oftentimes it's go figure out what you want to do commercially, and then I can help you.
Are there any other questions in the audience about regulatory?
Go.
Let's see a show of hands of anyone who has questions. Oh, we do have a few more. Okay.
We'll go quickly through them then.
Thank you for the talk. I had a question regarding softwares as a medical device specifically. I know it was kind of touched previously, and you talked about how the gap is just getting wider and wider. And I wanted to talk about specifically, number one, the choice of whether FDA regulation is actually a necessity in order to try to get your market to the point of your product to the point of reimbursement from an insurance standpoint. And then I'm assuming that you're probably going to say something like it's not necessary, but it could help. In which case, if that is the case, like how would you approach regulation in terms of de novo versus 510K? Because I know that you said that there weren't a lot of start.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Some software as a medical device is under enforcement discretion. Some software products aren't even medical devices, but they're some are general wellness products, some are under enforcement discretion, others are exempt products, others are 510Ks, others would clearly fall into more of a de novo or even potentially PMA category, though that's less likely in the current scenario. So, like, could you tell us a little bit more about maybe like sort of rough framework maybe to help us give you more input?
Yeah, and I completely echo what David said. It depends on what your software does, or more specifically, what claim are you going to make about your software? So it could be the exact code, but if you label it one way, it's regulated. If you label it differently, it's not regulated. So I don't want to say not regulated, it's regulated differently. There are just choices you get to make. So it's like anything. It's like my very favorite example, which I'm not carrying one today, but take a small stick of bamboo, and if you sell it as a craft item, then it's just a consumer product. If you sell it as a popsicle stick, then it's a food item, and if you sell it as a tongue depressor, it's a medical device. So it's not the technology, it's the intended use. And the exact same logic applies to software. What is the claim you want to make with it? And what does it enable? The benefit that it enables, or that you claim it enables. That's what's going to determine the regulation, the regulatory level.
And one of the things we talk to with innovators about is don't duck the hard stuff. The more impact you want to have, obviously, the more risk, and then the greater implication for regulatory. So if you say, well, we're just going to leave it all up to the physician's license, we're going to give them information, but they're still making the decisions, so it's not going to be regulated. Someone's going to end around you and come up with the product that gets regulated, has greater impact, and then maybe moves all the way to generating an actionable insight, not just making suggestions about what it is. So I don't know if that is helpful or not, but it's a way of trying to decide how much impact do you want to have with your tool.
Yeah, I'll also say that the FDA has gotten wise to that. So it's not like they don't understand that you can make a claim saying this is not a diagnostic device, but it's used as one. And so there's actually specific language now that the FDA looks at, and they will say things like, it's a usability question, then what is the physician's dependency on this information, And so they're getting into that and saying, if the physician becomes dependent on it, it doesn't matter what you label it as. It's a diagnostic.
Yeah, and they've been pushing in some areas, and you could quibble about it, but basically, if the timeliness of that feedback. So generally, the framework is if the physician can independently assess the information and adjudicate it themselves, all you're doing is streamlining sort of the administrative workflow, and that falls into sort of a lower regulated kind of a category. But FDA really does push, if they don't have time to review it, if it's a time critical decision, and they've pushed back on some stuff that I actually think the physician does have enough time to review, but FDA is like, no, they're regulating it higher. So if it's making a critical decision about sort of emergency scenarios for a patient, FDA is more likely, regardless of where you could theoretically fall, they're going to trip you up the ladder a little bit in terms of regulatory risk.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point you're making. So the risk-benefit argument, the logic of that isn't always what you think it is. So I'll give you an example, very similar to what David's example is, where in the beginning, when FDA first came out with their mobile medical app guidance, and what was that, in the 80s, the 90s, I guess. The first thing they said is, if it's an app that's used by a clinician, that is a medical app. It's a high-risk app. And if it's an app that's used by a patient, that's a low-risk app. With the presumption that apps designed for, quote, patient's knowledge or the lay user is somehow going to be a lower bar app. About a couple of years into the business, they realized, oh, that was faulty logic, and they flipped it on its head in the final guidance. And they said, if it's a patient-facing app that only the patient sees, the bar is higher because it's higher risk now. But if it's a patient-facing app where they're sharing it with the physician, or the physician's guiding them on using the app, like an asthma tracker or a glucose tracker, then the bar is lower. Now, you could see both logics, but it depends on how you present it and where the FDA is in its own experience with these products. So it's a little tricky. It's not so straightforward. Yeah.
There are a lot of physicians at FDA, and some of it is you'll find a lot of regulation around the world, as well as in the US, is very protectionist for both our industry and sort of our companies here against sort of development elsewhere, but also to protect existing moneyed interests like physician lobbies. So if you're going to take the physician out of the loop, be prepared for a lot of regulatory resistance. There are a lot of physicians at FDA.
Oh, I have to say the only time I've ever had trouble at the FDA has been from the physicians. I have never had a really cross relationship with anyone other than the physicians. Yeah, the technology people are great. The patient advocates are great. I have no issue with any of them. It's occasionally you'll get sometimes we get a good physician, but occasionally I know. I see the MD there.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
Even if they don't do it on purpose.
I know. Sometimes
I'm pretty sure there's another audience question.
that's way.
No, I don't want to cut you off. It's really
it's
good.
Okay. It's okay. I think you have to make a considered judgment at that point. So sometimes I'll get a client especially if the client is also a physician, that's the worst. Because then the two physicians are butting heads and I'm trying to keep them separate from each other. Oh, I had one physician very, very upset.
Oh, wait a minute.
Who just said, he insisted that I write the ombudsman at the FDA and tell them to fire the reviewer. And actually, I did get that reviewer displaced, but it's the only time I ever managed it.
Radiology?
No, no, it was a biomarker product. It's a biomarker product. But man, it just sometimes it gets intense. But it's always the physicians for some reason.
Can we bring in the
Yes,
audience again?
yes, please.
Would that be great?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You had another question.
Testing. Awesome. Great talk. The question is slightly complicated as I think it probably falls under like a combination product, and so I don't quite know what side of the fence it falls on, likely the CBER. But for startups that already possess IP and are interested in selling or licensing those assets and IP out, what steps can they do to de-risk the technology from a regulatory perspective to make it a little bit more sweeter on that licensee's side? Are there ways that you can transfer the regulatory work you've done as a company to that product when licensed out?
Absolutely. I deal with that all the time because many times the technology is not really, either it's not productizable or the team isn't there. And it's better to just license it out. Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things you can do is you can put yourself in the shoes of your eventual acquirer or licensee and ask, what is the clinical use case that they're going to pursue with this particular technology, and go ahead and do the landscape work for them, and even have a pre-submission meeting with the FDA and get some of the groundwork done, and that's extremely valuable. Yeah.
I've also seen, it depends on where you're at and whether you have a specific buyer in mind. I've seen some companies actually go have meetings with FDA with their, sort of acquire, or with their sort of drug partner, if it's a sort of device that's used with a drug, for instance. So, there's a lot of collaboration that can happen. I don't know. So sometimes, though, in these spaces, you have to be really careful because if you start down that regulatory path early, you can sometimes box in that company who's looking to come in and acquire you. So you want to be careful about whether you pursue it, whether you pursue some sort of marketing, indication or some sort of marketing submission before acquisition, or whether you let them deal with it, because it's like painting a house. You paint the house yellow and they really wanted it to be red, or whatever, and now it's a little harder to undo that for a regulatory submission.
We've only got a couple minutes left, but we have 2 more questions in the audience, so we'll go ahead and squeeze those in if everyone's okay with that.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
go ahead.
First of all, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. And I guess my question was on your step 1 slide. You were talking about thinking about when thinking about alternative uses for your tools or technology, to think about orphan cases as a way to expedite it. And I'm specifically interested in biologics or therapeutics. And so the first thing that came to mind are like orphan diseases.
Yep.
So if you have a new technology and you wanted to incorporate that into your strategy, like, do you think that's a con for potential investors because there's like fewer patients who could use it? And if so, is like one strategy to sort of follow up closely behind with a similar type that can be used? Okay.
Yeah, you already, your question has the answer in it. Yes, the answer is yes. You should, it's certainly a great beachhead indication to go for, because you will have a lower bar and it'll help you get products, get a marketable product in the market, and then, and help people that need the help. So that's kind of an important consideration. But it's hard to get investment only on our orphan product just because there's not enough of a market size. So what you have to have is a strategy to branch out then and say, what are you going to build on this and how are you going to do the variants on it? Yeah.
If there aren't any more audience
So
questions,
there was one in the back. No.
is there still one? I think she waved. But I'd like to give Nate the last question because he's seen many innovators come through and struggle with these issues in Catalyst. And so, Nate, please ask your question, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a closeout.
Great, thank you very much. One of the oftentimes innovators at UCSF are working on some very groundbreaking things, and this was kind of touched on in a few different ways. Whether it's something that hasn't been regulated yet, it doesn't quite fit. It's that puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit in. And we've also talked about how FDA is lagging behind, sometimes considerably slower now as more advancements happen. So what would you say to the innovator, the UCSF innovator, who thinks that their idea is totally, completely novel? And what would you recommend to them from a regulatory standpoint?
Okay, I'll take that, David, if you don't mind, first. You have to have a logic to how you approach it. The logic, I always like to go back to first principles. And the first principles are what I've said over and over again. What does the product do? And how do you know? How do you prove that it does that? And what is your assurance or your tolerance, that the product will not do what you don't want it to do? If you just take all of the attributes of this technology and the productization of it specifically and break it down, there's a very specific logic you can use to break it down and say, how do I assure this? I assure the following, how do I assure that it works? Well, I check for this, A, B, C, and D. How do I check A? I run a trial. How do I check B? I run a, simulation, whatever it is. The more convincingly and thoroughly you can build the logical case, the more likely it is that you can work with the FDA. You can find some kind of a framework within how the FDA has regulated something before. The more you can go there. So that's one strategy, is to go to first principles and do your assurance case very thoroughly. That's just rigor, basically, and there's no substitute for rigor. The second thing I would do is, it doesn't always work, but it's helpful, is to definitely identify all the places where it does not present novelty. Just say, here's the totality of the product, and this part's normal, this part's like something else, this part's, whatever. And then tell the story of how collectively those non-novel elements kind of bound or limit or harness the novel element from becoming a runaway element. So I know I'm speaking very abstractly, but there's a lot. The way you represent that is to say to the FDA, and innovators always want to lead with their novelty, and I have to coach them to say, no, don't lead with your novelty. Okay, start by setting the scene, saying, okay, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about specific products, but the one we were just looking at in the Catalyst. If you could say it's just like these other products in this, and this, except for this one piece, and this one piece, here's the rigor on that one piece, I think that's the better way to deal with it.
Yeah, no, fully aligned with that. And I would say usually there's some regulatory precedence to figure out at least how something should probably be classified. FDA may disagree, but this is the other thing. When you're going to interact with FDA, I always advise you, find a regulatory consultant who knows what they're doing, who you're going to talk to. Don't go to FDA and ask them, how is my product regulated? Yeah. Because fundamentally, as an ex-FDAer, I can tell you, FDA is only familiar with the stuff that they actually regulate. They're not really familiar with all of the things that are class 1 or under enforcement discretion or 510K, 510K exempt for one reason or another. They're only really familiar with the things that are 510K, de novo, PMA, HDE, NDA, BLA. That's what they know. So if you go to FDA and ask them what something is, they're going to say, well, it looks like this other thing that we regulate as a class 2 or class 3 or, new molecular entity. They're not going to tell you, oh, well, that's, obviously, not a medical device, or that's obviously, a class 1 product. They're going to try to figure out how it fits what they're familiar with. So just be very careful about that.
Yeah, correct. That's correct. Yeah, it's tricky, Nate. There's no magic bullet here.
Thank you.
I want to thank, first of all, our speakers, David and Geeta. It's incredible. It's an incredible opportunity to have this brain trust in the room speaking with us and on such a practical level and articulating these complex subjects so beautifully. There is a recording that'll be pushed out to you and everyone who registered. And also, Geeta offered up her slides in a PDF, so they were quite dense and very, very rich in tips. So those will be coming out to you as well. I want to thank all of you for staying late into the evening for this, and be sure to look for the next in the series. It'll be in December. And also, I want to thank Nate, who really owns the leadership of this seminar series, and we're really fortunate to have him on our group panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks. Thank you.